Our first guest to kickstart this show is none other than a dear friend of mine, Zaheerah Bham, who is the founder of the Jewels of Mind Academy, a learning space centered around emotional health and self-regulation rooted in Islamic principles. Zaheerah, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Zaheerah, looking really forward to this conversation. It's going to be poignant, but I do believe that the more we have these relevant and necessary discussions, the more we create avenues for healing, for growth, and for progress, inshallah.
Inshallah. And I think with that, let's just get straight into this because I know with you and me, the time is always limited because there's always a number of topics to discuss. Zaheerah, on the topic of abuse, the Center for Prevention of Abuse described it as perpetrators often abuse because of learned attitudes and feelings of entitlement and privilege, which can be difficult to reverse. It's not just entitlement and privilege. Let's explore a little bit about, where it starts off from and are people willing to change, or is it just something that once it's set in place, this is how it'll always be?
Okay, so to answer the first question, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. On the first, to answer the first question, I don't believe that entitlement and privilege is the only factors that drive abuse. I believe that when we look at the ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, a lot of those factors can determine or can result in abusive behavior because abuse stems from a lack of control. Abuse stems from any sort of chaos that a child grew up in where they didn't feel they had any control of themselves, of their way of thinking. So that could be as a result of abuse, that could be from privilege, from entitlement, but it also could be from abandonment, neglect. And there's no entitlement, there's no privilege in abandonment or in neglect. And to answer the second question, is it possible for change? Absolutely. But I have to be really clear here that there are two kinds of abusers. There is the narcissistic, psychopathic abuser, in which case room for hope, room for change is minimal. And then there's the abuser that is remorseful, that is regretful, and that seeks change, seeks hope, seeks the light at the end of the tunnel, and just needs the right support.
I think that sets the standard very much for the discussion that we need to have because, we talk about childhood experiences and we talk about what people know as being normal, what they see around them as being normal. And for me, this is important because very often you have families that say, and especially women who say, I'm staying for the sake of my kids, I'm staying here because of my kids. But what you don't understand is what you're teaching them may not be good for them going forward into various generations. And I really think we need to do away with this term of a broken home because you can have a nuclear family with everyone staying together and that in itself can be broken rather than saying, I'm going to give my child a healthy environment with me as a mother, with their father, a healthy environment, but separately. And that is not a broken home. That's giving your children the best. So Zaheerah, talking about, we'll come back to those two kinds of personalities you spoke about, but just talking about this, when children see learned behaviors, we can talk to them all we want about what's okay and how they should treat people and how they should treat their wives when they get married or how they should treat their husbands when they get married. And then, but what they're watching around them is something completely different if people are breeding their own traumas into it and not taking responsibility or realizing how they're impacting and affecting their own children and future families.
Absolutely. So that brings me to an important point. There are two people who enter an abusive relationship. The kind of person that comes from a stable environment, a stable home, a loving, empathetic, compassionate home where they received support, where their parents were attuned to them, that enters an abusive relationship. And immediately, as the abuse starts to set in, can detect the signs of abuse because it is completely foreign and unfamiliar to this person. And the second type of person that enters an abusive relationship comes from a place of chaos and instability, whether that is neglect, whether that is abuse, whether that is or any kind of chaos or instability. Maybe parents were working really hard and because they were working really hard, they couldn't give their children the attention or attune to their children the way their children needed them to. So the child who grows up in a stable, loving, nurturing, empathetic home will immediately sense something off. when they enter an abusive relationship, because abuse doesn't start off physically at all.
Mm-hmm.
It starts off where the abuser is sort of trying to test the limits, and this is all very unconsciously. So I think we need to very early on in our conversation humanize the perpetrator of abuse, because they have their own wounds as well. Abusers are more often than not victims of abuse themselves, or victims of unstable chaos in their childhood. So going back to the victims and how these sort of scenarios play out, when somebody comes from a stable home and enters an unstable, chaotic environment where the abuser is sort of testing the waters, they will be able to pick up on red flags really easily. They'll be able to pick up on the manipulation, the controlling behavior, the remnants of financial abuse, and they will immediately seek to remedy it. Okay, sometimes divorce is the first option, and I don't believe that it is. But for people who find this behavior so threatening, will explore that avenue. But then for the person who grew up in an unstable home, they will consider an environment that is abusive as familiar. And we need to understand that the way we are wired and the way we are conditioned is to believe that anything that is familiar to us, familiar to our childhood environment, familiar to the chaos or instability, is going to be considered safe within our minds, within our nervous system, and within our entire being. So it will be really difficult for a person who's been brought up in that kind of chaos and instability to pick up on any red flags until they really far down the line and they have children, they're completely dependent on their abuser, don't have any skills or any support network. Because again, let's remember that more often than not, the people who stay in abusive relationships without remedying it really early on are the people who've come from those kind of chaotic environments. So they don't always have the support structure. They don't always have the empathetic, compassionate, nurturing support system to fall back on. So I hope that makes sense, so that we can understand how complex it is for people that are in this situation, when we tell them, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just, walk away? They don't know any better. And sometimes they don't even have the support system to rely on when they want to make their efforts to move away from that sort of situation. And then the abuser also, because of the shame narrative, both for the victim and the abuser, it leaves the perpetrator feeling either really more aggressive and then displaying that abusive behavior on steroids, or really shameful without any room for hope.
There's a lot to unpack just in that, because we have to question, do we then choose the chaos as our safe spaces? Because that's all we know. We have to take a very quick ad break, and we'll continue this conversation with Zaheerah Hassan. Stay tuned.
Day by day. This is Salam Media.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Yasin Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yasin Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world? Partner with us today. Call Yasin Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33 346 2071 or visit www.yasinbadat.com. Yasin Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success.
After the recent attacks on Gaza, many families have been displaced with their homes left destroyed. Through your donations, our teams are on the ground in Gaza, providing support and delivering necessary aid to families affected. The people of Gaza need your help. Give hope. Donate today to Penny Appeal South Africa. www.pennyappeal.org.za 031 1100 573.
We are here on the ground with many appeal organizations in Gaza.
Attention drivers, revamp your ride with top quality tires at Best Drive Braamfontein. Our seasoned technicians guarantee a perfect fit for a smooth, safe journey. Choose from premium brands to budget-friendly options, all at competitive prices with special offers. From tire installations to brakes and shocks, we have all your vehicle needs covered. We also specialize in wheels, batteries, and suspension repairs. Get to meet our hands-on director, Mohammed Desai. With over 3 decades of experience, he ensures you receive exceptional service. Enjoy Salah facilities and a complimentary tea or coffee while you wait. Don't compromise on safety and performance. Ample parking available and full-time security on premises. Visit Best Drive Braamfontein today or call 011 837 4000 or 5000. We are 1 kilometer off the M1 highway. Take the Smith Street off-ramp towards Fordsburg, Fitas. Best Drive Braamfontein, where excellence meets service.
Hey, Gulam.
Yeah?
Did I return your lawnmower last month?
No.
Oh, no. Now what'll I do? I wanted to borrow it again, man.
With Rendry Jewelers, you won't have to borrow or lend because the prices are so well trimmed on all gold and diamond jewelry. Alternatively, we could remake your old jewelry into a brilliant new design. Visit Rendry Jewelers at 151 Stevens Lamini Road, Musgrave, Durban. Rendry Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the mid-morning show with me, Zaheerah Bham-Ismail. We chatting to Zaheerah Hassan, from founder of the Jewels of Mind Academy. Zaheerah, coming back to our conversation we had, and I know we went right into it, but talking about the 2 kinds of personalities in abusers. You said there's a remorseful one, and then you've got the narcissistic, psychopathic personality. And the one thing I want to leave this open for discussion, and I want people to be aware of, is this is not necessarily just males that are abusers. You often find females in these same roles as well. So when we're talking about abusers, we could be talking about males or females in this. Zaheerah, for me, I think, we all have narcissistic parts within each of us. Every single person does. But it's about how we address it, how we're willing to fix it, and how we're willing to allow it to impact and affect people around us. Take us through these different personalities of abusers in terms of, because I understand you say the one, there's no hope of getting anything or wanting to be fixed. But with so many resources available around us, so many networks, the conversations happening all the time, it's not something you can say, I didn't know I was doing this to anybody.
I understand what you're saying. But when it comes to the narcissistic personality, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that the narcissistic personality doesn't experience remorse, doesn't see what they are doing as something wrong. They project all of the blame onto the victim. And there's a very distinct pattern, even though narcissism exists on a spectrum, as you mentioned, and we all possess qualities and traits of narcissistic behavior. In fact, it's necessary for our survival to have that part of our ego inflated at times so that we can detect danger. But the narcissist, now, if we have to Google about narcissistic behavior, we are going to, as the layman, going to be able to pinpoint 1,000 narcissists in our life. But I think that's really careless and irresponsible. When people are involved in relationships with a narcissist, whether it's a parent-child relationship, a spousal relationship, an employer-employee relationship, there's a distinct characteristic and trait of projected behavior where the narcissist will deny any accountability or any responsibility for any wrongdoing that happens in the relationship. They minimize the effects of their harmful behavior and they project it onto the victim. And that is one of the distinct traits that differentiate narcissistic abuse from an abuse that occurs between an average person. Because the average person will recognize that their behavior is harmful, is uncondonable, and there is a massive element of remorse, of regret. And when you know that there's room for hope is when they take accountability, which, as I mentioned before, is something that is absent when it comes to the narcissist. And that's why in our support group, Heal for Hope, my husband and I don't work with the psychopaths or the narcissists, because based on statistics, based on studies, and based on my work with survivors of narcissistic abuse, there is no room for accountability and remorse when it comes to working with a narcissistic personality. In fact, to even call people narcissistic, like I said, is very irresponsible. But sadly, the narcissists won't take the NPD test, the Narcissistic Personality Disorder test, to confirm or deny their position. So we are left with the victims that have these characteristics of feeling very confused, feeling very shamed, carrying a lot of this burden of shame and of a lot of pain, internal wounding, and that is how we can distinguish between narcissistic abuse and other kinds of abuse. And I can confirm that narcissistic abuse is one of the most insidious and horrific kinds of abuse, because the victims have no hope. They have to do serious work on themselves, as with any sort of abuse victim that would need to do work. But when it comes to the victim of narcissistic abuse, the way that narcissistic abuse sort of just chips away at a person's sense of self, at their identity, at their self-worth is immeasurable, and it's really painful to go through.
So, but that's exactly what they want to do, right? Chip away at your self-esteem so you feel you can't survive in any situation without them, that you need them, and that you start believing everything that they reiterate about you. What I never understand is, if they are not happy being there, why does that personality not move on? Is it about control? Because I also want to reiterate that we're not just talking about physical abuse, and people think, oh, I never lift my hand on my spouse, so I'm not an abuser. But abuse at this level, especially of controlling, of dictating, of breaking down and chipping away at another human being, can be emotional, it can be mental, it can be verbal, spiritual as well, which we often see.
Yes. So when it comes to the narcissistic abuse and that dynamic, it's a really interesting combination, because a narcissist will gravitate towards an empath, and an empath will gravitate towards somebody with a narcissistic sort of identity. And this empath, this really soft-natured, gentle person, has this idea that I can change you, that I see the goodness in you, and I see all of the good qualities and characteristics in you. And narcissists will have that. There's a cycle of narcissist abuse where there's a lot of love bombing and gift buying and praises, but they use that in an attempt to make you feel dependent on them, to make you feel like you can't do anything without them, and to validate, hey, but I am a good person. You see, didn't you see the house that I bought you, or this expensive bag that I bought you? So it minimizes, like I said, the effects of the harmful behavior. So when we ask the question, but don't narcissists realize that what they are doing is bad? For them, they don't have that sort of concept that what they are doing is bad, because they're going to project all of the bad stuff onto their partners. And when it comes to the empath, there's this magnetization that happens, this magnet effect, where they are attracted to each other based on their own internal wounds and their belief that I can change him or her. And you know what, let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. And something that's also quite interesting, Physical abusers, okay, they tend to run out of steam come their 40s or 50s, okay? So when there's physical abuse that's prevalent in a relationship, it's usually in the formative years, and they sort of run out of steam. And then when they have children, and these mothers are sharing or perpetuating the cycle of abuse, when their children come to them and say, listen, I'm in this situation, what do I do? Then the mothers you'll hear will say, make sabr, just wait, see how things are so much better, it's not like that, just make sabr. But that's because the abuser, and this isn't necessarily a narcissistic abuser, it can be, the average abuser too, they've run out of steam because their physical abuse tends to simmer down at around about 40 or 50 years old. So there's this idea that, abuse, the abuse cycle stops, and I've made my sabr, I've been patient, and see, alhamdulillah. But that doesn't mean that the other forms of abuse are absent and have diminished. No, because like you mentioned, Zaheerah, there's also the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse, the spiritual abuse, the financial abuse, and those things will still be prevalent. But because we associate abuse only with physical abuse, we tend to dismiss all of the other kinds of abuse in the attempt of keeping the peace and maintaining izzat and maintaining our family image and our family name. And we have this rhetoric, where do I go? What do I do? And the truth is, as much as there are support networks for victims, there's also still a lot of shame and a lot of stigma that's associated with it. I recently did a panel discussion on my academy, and I had incredible speakers. I had two alimas, and I had a really dynamic male speaker who brought a beautiful perspective. And one of the alimas mentioned quite frankly that as a divorced woman who experienced abuse in her relationship, she didn't receive the support from her family, who are all ulama as well, after post her divorce, post the abusive situation. So I think there's a lot of room for work societally on the ground when it comes to how we view victims and how we view perpetrators. And we need to do a lot of work on ourselves. We need to be so active in this inner work that our children see it, so that when they enter their marriage, they understand they have to first work on themselves before they get involved in any relationship, before they commit to marriage. Because in that way, they'll be able to stand firmly in themselves, know what know their worth, and be able to confidently walk away from a relationship that is really harmful. And on the contrast, the male speaker that I had on my academy, he shared a really interesting perspective that I agree with. And at the time, I found it really triggering. But when I reflected on it, I realized how right he was. He said that abuse is quite subjective. And even though there are real abusers and there are real cases of abuse, abuse is still subjective. Sometimes we have victims that feel entitled, or that feel a certain way, and when their self-aware, emotionally mature partner stands their ground, maintains the boundary, and doesn't want to give in to their manipulation, they will immediately project it and say, "Oh, you're abusing me." Or you aren't, you standing firm in your boundary, you are manipulating me. So, we live in this digital era where there is such a lot of information at our disposal, and sometimes to our own detriment, because we have innocent people that are now being painted as these awful abusers, because as soon as we hear the word abuse, we become so sensitive. But at the same time, what action are we taking? So, this is a double-edged sword. And that's why we have to really actively participate in inner work, in self-awareness work, in therapy. And there's no shame in therapy. So many times people come into session with me, and they'll be working through issues, and they'll tell me things like, "Oh, but I had a stable home. I grew up in a stable home, and my parents were financially able and, financially secure." But the issues that they are working through doesn't give me the impression that there was stability, and then as we start probing further, we actually uncover that what we perceive as stable and what we perceive as healthy and normal isn't always. That's why engaging in the inner work is so important if we want healthy, thriving selves and relationships, and we want to pass it on to our children.
I think that hits the nail on the head, because the truth of it is, as you say, these labels are constantly thrown around with such ease and absolutely no responsibility that comes with it. And the main thing is, we can't. This notion of, oh, we're getting into a marriage to complete us. No, actually not. You need to come in completed yourself so that you can form healthy relationships and stop looking for other people to fix you or fix what's broken. You need to take that responsibility to fix yourself. So, very quickly, Zaheerah, I know that we are getting to the end of the segment, but when we talk about the stigma attached around discussing abuse or discussing what's actually happening, what is the stigma around people saying, I actually have a problem and I do want to fix it, I want to get the help so that I don't continue this trauma around it? Firstly, let's discuss quickly the stigma around it, and also how do people take that step forward, because now you're addressing it, you are remorseful, and you're not just saying, oh, I'm sorry and I fixed it, but you're taking accountability to ensure it doesn't continue, because it has to be more than an I'm sorry, because those I'm sorries become worthless after a while.
Absolutely. The I'm sorries, if they're not paired with action, is absolutely futile, and it means nothing. So I believe that the people who come forward and say, listen, I need help, I have a problem, they are the people that need to be celebrated. And I know that it sounds so counterintuitive for the way that we've been conditioned to who and what we celebrate, but I believe that those people need to be celebrated, and they need to be given the supportive communities to be able to sustain that desire for change. And that's why we have programs like the Heal for Hope program, where it's a 12-step program for perpetrators of abuse and their families, to give them that supportive, nurturing environment to help them heal and to help them grow and to help them take accountability, which is the important part. But to address the question on stigma, as a community and as a society, we need to understand our role here, and we need to understand how we create these perpetrators by enabling them. And such a lot of this behavior, I mean, think about it from like, if we had to think of a drug abuser, oh, immediately that drug abuser is shamed, but those parents shame, poor parents, look at them, their son is this way or their daughter is that way, without really introspecting. How did this drug abuser become a drug abuser? What was their situation that caused their nervous system to become so dysregulated that they found it so necessary to numb themselves in drugs, right? So what we need to do is we need to stop enabling bad behavior as a collective society, and we need to be able to hold people accountable. And that doesn't mean through shaming, and that doesn't mean through being nasty, because I don't believe that is ever going to render the kind of results that we really hope for. But I mean that we need to do that through support, through education. I believe that topics like abuse and reform and help and healing need to be conversations that are ongoing, so that the more we have these conversations, the less stigmatized it becomes, and the more we humanize perpetrators of abuse as anybody who has a problem. What our problem is that we believe we're superhuman, and we cannot expose our flaws to anybody, and we must just keep things under wraps. But the truth is that isn't going to allow us to get the resources, to get the support that we need. And there is support. There are people out there who are willing to and able to help. And we need to be able to, drop our guard down, and we need to be able to encourage our children, our family members when there's a problem. Instead of shaming them, we need to say, how can I support you? Or, how can I help you? What, maybe, there's just so many different options that we can explore, but shaming is definitely shouldn't be featured on that list.
Absolutely. And I'm so appreciative of platforms like yours that allow these supporting networks for abusers to come in and to heal from that, because it really sets a good standard for going forward, because that's taking responsibility with action. Zaheerah, it's always such a pleasure to chat to you, and your insight, your input is always welcomed. I always tell you, we can finish these conversations for a few hours going forward, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Inshallah, these conversations won't just happen during Women's Month. It's something that we will be seeing more often on more regular platforms, not just, oh, this is irresponsible ways of throwing around terms, but responsible ways of opening networks and opening platforms for people to be heard, to be helped, and to be healed. Zaheerah Bham, founder of the Jewels of Mind Academy, shukran for joining us on air on Salam Media this morning. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. So wonderful being here, Zaheerah. Until next time.
Inshallah. We'll be taking a very quick ad break and then we'll be starting again with our next guest. Stay tuned.